We take care of our own. That simple phrase carried real weight as 200 leather-jacketed bikers filled every seat, booth, and corner of Claire's barely hanging on diner. Just one day earlier, she had defended a lone Hell's Angel after the local police started giving him trouble. What followed would shake an entire town and leave it forever changed. Hi there. Welcome to Life Tales. Let's dive in. Claire Mitchell's fingers were raw and red, cracked from scrubbing the sticky diner counter for what felt like the 10th time that hour. The lunch crowd, if you could even call a handful of regulars a crowd, had come and gone, and now she was quietly doing the math in her head, trying to figure out if today's earnings could cover the electric bill that was still tucked, unopened inside her purse. The big, bold final notice had already seeped through the envelope. Just a few more months, she murmured, brushing a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear. It was a promise she'd repeated to herself too many times over the past year and a half ever since her dad suffered a devastating stroke and she'd stepped in to run the family diner. Her old life, nursing shifts in the city, her apartment, her independence had all been put on hold for a fading small-town eatery that seemed to lose more money than she could ever hope to patch up. Overhead, the ancient ceiling fan squeaked along in lazy, slow circles, barely stirring the heavy summer air. Outside, Millfield's main street sat in its usual hush, especially since the local factory axed its third shift. 3 businesses had already gone under since January. Some days, Claire couldn't help but wonder if Mitchell's diner was next in line. The soft jingle of the front door bell rang out, a sound her father used to say was the heartbeat of the place, and Claire instinctively looked up. Her stomach tightened. A towering figure stepped inside, draped in worn leather that looked like it had weathered storms and time alike. His bearded face was rugged and half-hidden behind a thick, unkempt gray that hinted at thousands of dusty miles. Tattoos, faded and fraying at the edges, crept up his forearms like pieces of a story that had been told in pain and ink. But it was the emblem stitched into the back of his vest that froze the room, the infamous death's head insignia of the Hells Angels. Every head turned. Old Mrs. Whitaker clutched her pearls like she was in the middle of a church revival. The Simmons brothers stopped chewing, forks caught midair. Even the radio crackled with awkward static as if sensing the shift in the room's energy. The biker clearly noticed the tension. His broad shoulders lowered just a bit as though bracing himself, and he walked slowly toward the counter. Each step of his heavy boots thudded on the worn-out linoleum like punctuation marks in a sentence nobody wanted to finish. He picked the farthest stool, the one most removed from the others, and sat without a word. The posture of a man well acquainted with being unwelcome. Claire could almost hear her father's voice whispering through the years, "Money's money. Doesn't matter who's holding it." But he'd never had to serve a Hell's Angel in a town like Millfield where gossip moved faster than facts and legends about biker gangs were treated like scripture. Taking a breath to steady herself, Claire grabbed a clouded menu and filled a glass of ice water. Across the room, Kelly, the other waitress, had suddenly developed an intense interest in restocking the ketchup bottles far, far away. "Appreciate you stopping by Mitchell's," Claire said as she approached, giving the biker the same practiced, warm smile she gave to every guest. "Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Made it fresh this morning." The man lifted his gaze, and Claire was caught off guard. His eyes, pale blue and rimmed with red, looked hollow, like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in weeks. Despite the rugged face and leather creases, those eyes belonged to someone else entirely. "Coffee," he said quietly, his voice unexpectedly soft. "Make it strong. Black. And whatever's quickest from the back. I've been writing since before sunrise." As Claire reached for the chipped percolator to pour his coffee, she glanced at his hands. They were enormous, coarse, and scarred, clearly shaped by a hard life. But as he took the mug, she noticed a slight tremor. His knuckles were scraped raw, and the edge of a hospital bracelet peeked out from under his cuff. There was more than just road fatigue in his expression. Claire recognized it instantly. That deep, wordless sorrow she'd seen too often in her oncology rotations. It was the look of someone keeping vigil, someone waiting. "Still got a long ride ahead of you?" she asked gently, using the same friendly, casual tone her father always used with strangers. He wrapped both hands around the mug like it was the only thing anchoring him. After a long sip, he spoke, each word heavy with exhaustion. "Riverside Hospital," he finally said. "That's where I'm heading back to." He hesitated. "My daughter." His voice caught on the word, and his eyes dropped back to the coffee. His grip on the cup tightened. "My daughter," he repeated again, quieter this time, but whatever he meant to say after that never came out. Claire felt something stir deep inside her. Not sympathy, not exactly. She could tell he wouldn't accept that. But there was a feeling she knew too well. Recognition. In that moment, she wasn't looking at a biker or a patch. She was just looking at a father holding on. "I'll put your order in right now," she said softly. "Toast and eggs, okay?" "Quickest thing I've got, about 6 minutes." He nodded, and Claire saw the tension in his shoulders ease, just a little. Maybe it was the food. Maybe it was the fact that for once, nobody had asked him to explain himself. He gave a faint nod, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to notice. Maybe it was the thought of hot food on the way, or maybe it was simply that she hadn't asked him to justify why he was there. As Claire turned to slip the order through to the kitchen, she could feel the eyes on her back. Mrs. Whitaker was murmuring something urgently to Mrs. Langley, their silver heads leaned close together like schoolgirls swapping secrets. The Simmons brothers were openly scowling, their breakfast forgotten mid-bite. And Kelly? Still laser-focused on the ketchup bottles like they held the secrets of the universe. In towns like Millfield, people remembered everything and they never forgot what scared them. The Hells Angels had a reputation that echoed louder than facts. 2 decades back, a biker gang had torn through town and left Thompson's grocery with smashed windows after a heated argument. No one could say for sure whether they'd been angels or someone else entirely, but it didn't matter. In Millfield folklore, every biker wore the same guilt by default. Then came the familiar jingle of the front door again, and Claire's stomach sank. In walked 2 local officers, Knox and Davis. Both were regulars at the diner, usually polite enough, though Claire had always found Knox's cocky strut a bit over the top. Their eyes locked onto the biker the moment they stepped inside. Claire watched as Knox gave Davis a subtle elbow and a nod. Without hesitation, they flanked the man, taking seats on either side of him like they were boxing him in. Well, Knox said, his tone loud enough for the whole place to hear. "Don't usually get your kind in Millfield. Just passing through. I take it." The biker didn't even glance up. "Just grabbing a meal, officer." Claire returned with a plate of eggs and toast and gently set it down in front of him. "Anything else I can bring you?" Before he could answer, Knox cut in sharply. "How about checking this guy's ID, Claire? Make sure he's not one of the angels we've been getting those bulletins about." The biker slowly moved a hand toward his pocket, but Knox's fingers twitched near his holster. "Easy now." Claire felt heat rise in her chest. "He's a customer, Knox. Paid like everyone else." "Not like me," Knox sneered. "His type brings problems, drugs, fights, worse." The biker looked up for the first time since they arrived. His voice stayed calm, but now it carried steel. "You don't know a damn thing about me, officer." Knox leaned in, close enough to make it personal. "I know that, Patch. That tells me everything I need to know." The biker looked like he might speak again, but Davis interrupted before he could. "Maybe we should run his plates. Just to be sure." All around them, the diner had gone tense. A few customers nodded quietly while others shifted in discomfort, pretending not to notice what was happening. The biker gently set down his fork. "I'm just trying to eat before I head back to Riverside Hospital," he said, voice cracking just slightly. "My daughter, she's not doing well." Knox chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure." The old, sick family member routine. Classic move. And that was it. Something in Claire broke. Maybe it was thinking of her father in that care home, helpless in a hospital bed. Or maybe it was just the way her mother had raised her to stand up when something felt wrong. Either way, she was done. "That's enough," she said, her voice slicing through the uncomfortable silence. "You're not going to sit here and bully my customers, Knox." The entire diner froze. Nobody spoke to Officer Knox like that. Especially not about how he handled people he didn't like the look of. Knox slowly turned toward her, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Claire said evenly. "The man came in to eat. He's been respectful and you're treating him like he's already guilty of something." Davis leaned forward, voice lower but still firm. "You don't know who you're defending, Claire." "I'm standing up for someone eating in my diner," she replied. "And unless you've got a legitimate reason beyond his vest, I suggest you let him have his meal in peace." Knox stood up suddenly, casting a long shadow across the counter. "Your father would be ashamed to see you taking sides against the law." That line landed like a slap, and not just to Claire. Everyone knew Henry Mitchell had once been one of the most respected men in town. Half the police force used to drink coffee with him at that very counter. Claire didn't flinch. "My dad taught me to look at how people behave, not what they wear," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of nerves inside her. "And right now, it's you causing the trouble, not him." The silence that followed was thick and sharp. You could practically hear people blinking. Mrs. Langley suddenly found her pie extremely interesting. Mark Ellis, an old high school classmate of Claire's, stared down at his coffee like it might save him. Then the biker quietly pushed back his stool. "Maybe I'll just take my food to go," he said, reaching into his jacket. "No," Claire said, standing her ground. "Keep your wallet. Your meal's on me today." The man blinked in surprise, a flicker of raw gratitude softening his eyes. Knox turned red, clearly seething. "You're making a mistake, Claire. This town remembers who's on its side." The warning was anything but subtle. And in a place like Millfield, being remembered for the wrong reasons could mean more than just lost customers. Claire's hands were trembling, but she refused to let it show. She kept her chin high and stared Knox down. "Are you going to order something?" she asked calmly, "or did you just come in to hassle paying customers?" For a second, she honestly thought Knox might snap. But instead, he pulled a few bills from his wallet and slapped them onto the counter. "Lost my appetite," he muttered. "Let's go, Davis." The door swung shut behind them with a sharp jingle that felt more like a warning than a goodbye. Gradually, the murmurs in the diner picked back up, though the mood was far from normal. Claire turned to the biker, who was watching her now with an unreadable expression. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," she said quietly. He slowly shook his head. "Don't be. Not many people would have stepped in like that." There was a beat of silence before he added, "Name's Jack. Jack Hunter. Claire Mitchell." He gave her a small, genuine nod. "Appreciate it, Claire Mitchell." He finished his meal quickly, and when he was done, he slid a crisp $20 bill onto the counter, even though she'd insisted earlier that it was on the house. "That's for your dad," he said simply, then headed out the door. Claire tried to carry on with her shift as usual, but the sideways glances and quiet murmurs from the other patrons made it clear it wouldn't be forgotten so easily. By the time she flipped the closed sign that evening, she'd overheard enough hushed conversations and awkward goodbyes to know the news was already racing through Millfield like wildfire. That night, sitting by her father's bedside at the Millfield Care Center, she recounted the entire day to him even though he couldn't answer. "I don't know if what I did was right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I couldn't just sit there and let it happen." Her father's stroke had taken his voice and most of his mobility, but as she looked into his eyes, she thought maybe she saw understanding. Maybe even pride. Or maybe that's just what she needed to believe. The following morning, Claire arrived early to prep the diner like she always did. But something was off. Taped across the front window was a printed sign, the words "closed until further notice" in bold block letters. Scrawled underneath, in thick red marker, were 5 bitter words. "No biker lovers in Millfield." Her heart sank. She yanked the sign down, her hands shaking not from fear, but fury. Inside, everything looked untouched, but the message had already been delivered loud and clear. The breakfast crowd was thinner than usual. Much thinner. And by midday, the silence inside Mitchell's diner was louder than the clatter of dishes had ever been. The place, once full of casual chatter and forks tapping on plates, now felt like a ghost town, with just a few brave regulars crossing the invisible picket line. Mrs. Langley came in for her usual tuna on rye. As Claire poured her coffee, the older woman gave her hand a gentle pat. "This'll pass, sweetheart. People in towns like this, well, they forget faster than they admit. At least when they want to." Later, Mark Ellis and his wife made a deliberate choice to sit at the window booth, the most visible spot in the place. "Let him talk," Mark said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Still the best damn coffee in town." Claire smiled. But the truth was, those small signs of support weren't enough to stop the panic slowly curling in her stomach. She ran the numbers in her head, again. One more slow week like this and she'd be short on rent. By 2 o'clock, the diner was completely empty. Claire stood behind the counter, hands braced on the edge as she stared out the front window. Her resolve had been rock solid that morning, but now, with no customers and the bills piling up in her mind, the weight of it all pressed down. This place wasn't just a business. It was part of her bloodline. The place where she'd learned to pour coffee and count quarters. Her father's pride, his life's work. And it was slipping through her fingers all because she chose to show a little kindness. The bell over the door jingled and Claire immediately straightened up, wiping at her eyes and pulling on her usual friendly smile like armor. A man, probably in his 50s, stepped inside. He wore jeans and a plain blue tee, his leather jacket simple except for a small Hell's Angels pin clipped near the collar. Right behind him was a woman around the same age, her gray hair pulled back into a neat braid. "You Claire Mitchell?" the man asked, his voice calm but direct. Claire gave a hesitant nod, suddenly on edge. "I'm Greg Hunter, Jack's older brother," he said, extending his hand. "And this is my wife, Teresa." Claire shook their hands, the confusion clear on her face. Jack told us what happened yesterday, Teresa said gently. He wanted to come himself, but he's still at the hospital with his daughter. Her name's Ava. How's she doing? Claire asked, voice softening instantly. Greg's face darkened. It's not great. She's got stage 4 cancer. They're trying this last-ditch treatment at Riverside. Experimental. It's pretty much the final shot. Claire's chest tightened. I'm so sorry. Claire's chest tightened. I'm really sorry to hear that, she said softly. Jack told us you treated him with kindness when hardly anyone else would have. Teresa went on. He said you stood up to those officers like you'd been doing it your whole life. Claire gave a sheepish shrug, brushing it off. Honestly, it wasn't a big deal. Anyone else would have done the same. Greg shook his head slowly. No, Claire, they wouldn't have. And judging by how empty this place is, it looks like you're paying the price for doing the right thing. She didn't try to argue. One glance around the near-silent diner said everything. We just wanted to show our appreciation, Teresa said gently, reaching into her purse. Jack mentioned your father's not well. I'm not looking for a handout, Claire cut in quickly, pride flashing in her voice. Greg raised his hands in peace. Wasn't planning on offering one, but we thought we might be able to send a little traffic your way. Before Claire had the chance to ask what he meant, a distant growl of engines began to rise and kept rising. Not 1 or 2 bikes. Dozens. Claire stepped toward the front window, eyes widening as more and more motorcycles came into view, rolling in from both directions like a leather and chrome river. The street filled, then the parking lot, and soon they were spilling into the empty lot next door. There weren't just a handful, there were hundreds. Men and women of all ages wearing Hell's Angels patches or related club colors, dismounting in waves. Helmets came off. Riders stretched tired limbs after what had clearly been a long haul. What is this? Claire asked, barely able to raise her voice above the roar outside. Greg gave her a quiet grin. Jack reached out to some of our nearby chapters last night. Told them about a diner owner who treated him like a human being when it mattered most. Word travels fast among us. Last I counted, there were over 200 folks out there. 217 actually, Teresa chimed in with a proud smile. And they've all been riding since sunrise. Something tells me they're ready for a good meal. Right on cue, the bell above the door jingled. The first group of bikers filed in calm, respectful, even gracious as they greeted Claire and found seats. Then another wave followed and another. Every table filled. The counter lined up. Some stood waiting their turn without a single complaint. Claire stood frozen for a second, completely stunned. A tall man with a thick white beard made his way to her. You must be Claire. I'm Marcus, he said warmly, extending a huge hand. President of the Riverside chapter. Jack's part of our crew. She shook his hand instinctively. I hope we're not putting you out too much, he said with a chuckle. Claire blinked. I don't think I have enough food for this many people. Marcus grinned wide. Already taken care of. Teresa called your suppliers this morning. You've got a big delivery coming in about 20 minutes. We've got it all covered, don't worry about the bill. Claire scanned the room, overwhelmed. The diner that had been eerily quiet just an hour ago now pulsed with energy and life. Bikers placed orders quickly, coffee, water, whatever was available. They paid in cash, no questions asked, and nearly all of them left generous tips behind. Still dazed, Claire turned to Marcus. I don't get it, she said. You all did this because I stood up for Jack? Marcus's smile faded slightly as his tone grew more serious. People look at us and see patches and leather and think they know the story. A lot of the time, they don't treat us like we're people at all. Jack was riding to the hospital to see his daughter, might have been to say goodbye, and those cops gave him a hard time just because of what he was wearing. He glanced around the buzzing diner. But you? You didn't look away. You stood up. You showed respect when it would have been easier to say nothing. That kind of thing matters to us. More than you know. Outside, engines continued rumbling as more bikes rolled up. Across the street, a crowd had started forming, locals, heads turning, whispering. Even Officer Davis was among them, clutching his radio, wearing an expression that landed somewhere between confusion and disbelief. The bell jingled again, and Claire turned only to see a familiar figure stepping through the doorway. Jack Hunter stood there, looking a little worn down but far less burdened than the day before. Hope you don't mind, he said with a hint of a smile. I invited a few friends. Claire let out a laugh she hadn't realized she'd been holding back. I think we can make some room. For the next few hours, Claire and the two teenage waitresses she'd managed to call in worked harder than they ever had before. Just as promised, the food truck arrived on time with enough supplies to feed a small army of hungry bikers. And that's exactly what they did. Every seat was taken, and as soon as one customer stood up, another took their place. The rotation never stopped. The cash register overflowed. Claire had to empty it twice before the end of the day. Word started to spread beyond the street. Bit by bit, some of the regulars began to show up, hesitant at first, clearly unsure how to act with so many bikers packed inside. But the riders welcomed them without hesitation, sharing tables, cracking jokes, and making space like they'd been neighbors for years. Mrs. Langley ended up deep in a cheerful discussion with a gray-haired biker grandmother about their mutual obsession with quilting. Mark Ellis, after a few minutes of polite small talk, realized the guy sitting across from him had also served in Vietnam. Even the high school principal got pulled into a debate about school reform with a rider who turned out to be a college professor when he wasn't on his Harley. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, the whole thing felt less like a surprise visit and more like an impromptu block party. Someone had dragged out a portable grill to handle the overflow from the kitchen. Music flowed from bike-mounted speakers. Neighborhood kids crept in closer, wide-eyed at the rows of polished chrome and roaring engines. In the middle of all the movement, Claire found a brief, quiet moment and pulled Jack aside. "How's Ava?" she asked. "That's your daughter, right?" Jack's face lit up. Just a little. "Yeah, that's actually why I could be here today. Got a call from the doctor this morning. The treatment, it's showing signs of working. Numbers are up. Still early, but it's the first good news we've had in a long time." His voice faltered at the end, thick with emotion. Claire didn't think. She just stepped forward and gave him a hug. He froze for a second, surprised, and then hugged her back tightly. "She wants to meet you," he said as they pulled apart. "The woman who stood up for her old man. I told her you reminded me of her. Tough. Says what she means, no time for nonsense." Claire smiled, her voice quiet but steady. "I'd really like that." As the evening wound down, Marcus, the chapter president, stood near the counter and raised his hand for attention. Conversations trailed off until the room was still. "I want to thank Claire Mitchell for the way she welcomed us today." His deep voice rolled across the room with natural authority. "And I want to make something very clear to the folks of Millfield." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "Mitchell's Diner is now under the protection of the Hells Angels. From this day forward." A roar of cheers erupted from the bikers. "We'll be making this one of our regular stops," Marcus added, "and let me just say, if anyone gives Miss Mitchell grief about who she chooses to serve here, they'll be answering to all of us." Then, locking eyes with Officer Davis, who had slipped inside and was now trying to look invisible in the back booth, Marcus asked with quiet weight, "Are we clear?" Davis gave a quick, sheepish nod. "Good." Marcus's face broke into a grin. "Now, who's ready for pie? I heard Claire makes the best apple pie in at least 3 counties. More cheers." Conversations picked back up like nothing had paused at all. Later that night, after the last engine had rumbled away and the final biker waved goodbye, Claire turned the key in the diner door and finally exhaled. She counted the day's earnings at the counter. It was more than she'd taken in over the last 2 weeks combined. But beyond the money, something else had shifted, something in the town itself. The air felt different. That morning, Millfield had nearly turned its back on her. But by sunset, it had seen something it hadn't looked for before, humanity behind leather and patches. Maybe, just maybe, a few minds had changed. As Claire drove to the care center to visit her father, she couldn't help smiling at the strange twist of fate. She'd stood up for one man and ended up with an entire community behind her. The next morning, Claire found a small package propped against the front door of the diner. Inside was a custom-made leather vest. Across the back, stitched in bold letters, "Mitchell's Diner," surrounded by the phrase, "Friends of the Angels." Pinned to the vest was a note, written in rough block handwriting. "For the bravest diner owner we know. Ava's doing better. She still wants to meet you. Jack." Claire carefully hung the vest on the wall behind the counter, right beside her father's old apron. An hour later, Officer Knox came in for his usual cup of coffee. He was quieter than usual. No swagger, no sideways comments. Claire served him with the same smile she offered every customer. Because her father had always taught her one thing: judge people by how they treat others. not by what they wear. And sometimes, it takes a room full of bikers to remind an entire town of that simple truth. Funny how the smallest moments end up rewriting everything. Claire Mitchell didn't wake up that morning planning to make a statement. She didn't set out to be brave. She just saw something wrong and chose not to stay quiet. She couldn't have known that defending a tired stranger would bring 200 bikers through her door, rescue her father's legacy, and begin healing old divides in a place stuck in its ways. Courage doesn't always come with fanfare or big speeches. Sometimes it shows up in an apron and a cup of black coffee served with quiet kindness when everyone else walks away. Love the story? Tap that like button and subscribe for more real, powerful moments like this one. And don't go just yet to check out the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you soon.